In a previous video, we talked about the impressive rise of the Odebrecht empire. After 2 generations of achievements, control of the company fell under Marcelo Odebrecht in 2009. Marcelo was more like his grandfather in character. He didn't drink, he didn't like parties, he preferred family time more than anything, and he didn't have glamorous tastes when eating. What did characterize Marcelo was that he had much more aggressive ambitions than those of his father, whom he publicly branded as weak and lacking firmness in command. Marcelo wanted to expand the Odebrecht empire to reach extraordinary levels. He was not interested in sitting at the table of the big boys in Brazil. He wanted to play in the world leagues. His popularity within the company was very high, but the relationship between Marcelo and his father, Emilio, deteriorated more and more, due to the constant criticism that the son publicly directed towards his father. Fortunately for the company, the interventions from the old man Norberto helped maintain harmony within the family, and Marcelo respected him. He wanted to take the model developed by his grandfather Norberto, but take it to a higher level of sophistication. The modus operandi kept repeating. The company paid bribes to win the tenders. Then the works were built charging overcosts, and these charges were then used to finance the payment of bribes and political patronage. In the tenders, the largest companies in the country operated as a cartel, where they appeared to compete with each other, but everything was a facade. Behind the scenes, these companies distributed the contracts in a cartel cooperation scheme called the 16 Players Club, the 16 largest construction companies in Brazil. This business model was exported to several countries, especially in Latin America, and for this, Odebrecht used the support of state development banks such as the BNDES, which had also been corrupted. To handle the enormous volume of bribes in a safe manner, Marcelo created a department that would be exclusively dedicated to these bribery and dirty money laundering operations. It is in this environment that the company reaches jaw-dropping levels of growth, influence, and prosperity. In just 6 years, Marcelo's administration tripled the construction company's annual turnover. With his initiatives, Odebrecht achieves contracts for more than $18 billion in Latin America, outside Brazil, and another billion in contracts in Europe, the United States, the Middle East, and Africa. And in Brazil, things couldn't go better. In 2014, Brazil would hold the Football World Cup, and in 2016, the Olympic Games. A whole banquet of contracts to build stadiums, sports facilities, highways, subway lines, apartment buildings, and all kinds of works. And Odebrecht feasted on all this. 50 years ago, during the construction of Brasilia, Odebrecht had been excluded. At the beginning of the 21st century, it was now the biggest beneficiary. The name Odebrecht was admired, and to a certain extent, in political and business environments, feared. With the success came the scandals, one after another since the 70s. One after another from which, inexplicably, the company seemed to emerge unscathed. In 2014, the old patriarch of the family, Norberto Odebrecht, the founder of the company, died. After Norberto's death, the relationship between Emilio and Marcelo reaches its breaking point, but the company remains solid for the moment. Already in 2015, the prestigious business magazine Forbes placed Marcelo as the owner of the 9th largest fortune in Brazil, estimated that year at $3.6 billion. Odebrecht was untouchable. No investigation could stop it. But all this changed with Operation Lava Jato, and the origin of the debacle did not come from his enemies in Sao Paulo or from some court in Rio de Janeiro. It came from the confessions of a simple money exchanger from Brasilia who helped politicians launder dirty money stolen from the state oil company. Although Alberto Youssef was unknown to the average Brazilian, he was a known figure in the world of corruption in Brasilia, the country's capital. He developed a reputation for being very efficient when it came to laundering bribe money. On occasions, he had been arrested for crimes of money laundering and corruption to the detriment of state companies, and he was each time freed. Of course, Alberto made it very clear early on that when his freedom were in danger, he was not willing to be a martyr, and the politicians and businessmen for whom he worked made sure to move heaven and earth to rescue him when he was arrested or charged. In 2006, Alberto Youssef began laundering bribe money related to contracts from the state oil company Petrobras, and to do it, he declared the money as profits from a gas station in Brasilia, Posto da Torre, owned by his partner Carlos Habib Chatter, where a car wash also operated, in Portuguese Lava Jato. For 8 years, there were no problems until Alberto made a serious mistake. In an email, Alberto was talking with a Petrobras official, Paulo Roberto Costa, about the purchase of a Ranger Rover, a gift for Costa, his client and friend, who for 8 years had been the director of purchases and supplies at Petrobras. Investigators began to track him down and began to find other participants in the plot. But even at this point, no one imagined how far things would go. On this occasion, Alberto Youssef's corrupt clients could not rescue him, and he decided to cooperate with the authorities. But when he began to talk, the prosecutors were speechless at the stature of those involved. Politicians and businessmen had been feasting on the state-owned company Petrobras. An arrest generated a confession, and that confession generated more arrests, and those other arrests generated more confessions. The investigation revealed that there was a cartel of 16 companies that had a monopoly on doing business with Petrobras. This was called the 16 Players Club, and it had well-defined rules on how to operate. It was this cartel that selected the companies to win the Petrobras tenders, to build refineries, oil stations, public works, and any other projects. This cartel felt so confident that they established their rules in writing. Of these companies, the largest and most powerful was Odebrecht. The Lava Jato investigation aroused extraordinary levels of mobilization among Brazilian public opinion, and the company founded by Norberto Odebrecht was the focus of popular anger. The public stood behind Judge Moro, who was conducting the investigations, and the political class could not stop the tsunami that was bearing down on it. Odebrecht executives were arrested. Emilio and Marcelo ended up behind bars, ratting out their patrons in the spheres of power. Those were strange times where former business and political rivals became cellmates, where former allies betrayed each other. The important thing was to save one's skin. In an apparent moment of reflection, Marcelo tells his cellmate, another former Odebrecht executive, "Do you know why I went so far? That's because I thought the system was invulnerable. If I had known we were so vulnerable, I would not have done what I did." At the same time that the company was the subject of investigations in Brazil, requests for judicial cooperation were pouring in from other countries. Panama, Switzerland, Mexico, Colombia. But the most feared of all was nothing more than the parallel investigation that was taking place in the United States. This was what detonated the legal and political bomb in the rest of Latin America. The initial response of the governments of these countries was denial. In some way, they tried to convince the public opinion of their home countries that although Odebrecht had acted corruptly in Brazil, everything had been limited to there, that in the Dominican Republic, Argentina, Mexico, or Peru, Odebrecht had operated with the greatest conceivable transparency. But in December 2016, the justice systems of these countries would be cornered, and it would no longer be possible for them to turn a blind eye. The company executives admitted before the U.S. Department of Justice that they had distributed bribes in amounts approaching $800 million to officials and politicians in 12 countries. The largest recipients were Brazil, Venezuela, the Dominican Republic, Panama, and Argentina. The justice system of the countries mentioned in the confessions before the DOJ had nothing left to do but begin to investigate, and it must be said that the repercussions were similar to that of an earthquake. Politicians and businessmen ended up in prison, and even many of those who were not convicted ended up having their political careers wiped out. In Mexico, it was discovered that Odebrecht had financed the campaign of President Enrique Peña Nieto. The confessions came from Peña Nieto's own campaign coordinator, who declared that the company financed the campaign in exchange for the promise of receiving contracts with the state once he won. In Colombia, key witnesses in the case died in very strange conditions. One of them was Jorge Enrique Pizano, an auditor who denounced irregularities in the construction of the Ruta del Sol 2 roads. The media referred to him as the man who knew too much. Conveniently for those involved, Jorge Pizano died of supposed natural causes, and shortly afterward, his body was cremated. His son, Alejandro Pizano, died 3 days later from cyanide poisoning, supposedly by accident. In Peru, President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski had to resign. Former President Alejandro Toledo became a fugitive. Former President Ollanta Humala and his wife were accused in court, and former President Alan Garcia took his own life when agents showed up at his house to arrest him. Odebrecht confessed to having paid Alan Garcia $4 million in exchange for the awarding of works for the Lima Metro, and as means of payment, there was no shortage of creative ideas. Just one example is enough. The construction company paid Alan Garcia $100,000 to give a talk in Sao Paulo. Outside of Brazil and Venezuela, the Dominican Republic, located on the Caribbean island of Hispaniola, was the country that received the most money in bribes proportionally. Between 2001 and 2016, the Dominican executive requested and obtained congressional approval for more than $5 billion in loans for works built by Odebrecht. The amounts on the credits were then readjusted to increase the sums of money needed because the construction company consistently exceeded the initial budget for the works. The company admitted to having distributed $92 million in bribes and agreed with the Dominican state to double this sum, $184 million, as compensation for the country. The construction company paid $60 million to the state between 2017 and 2018, and since then, as of the date of publication of this video, it has not paid a cent more. The construction company has declared bankruptcy in Brazil and the United States. In Brazil, although Marcelo Odebrecht was sentenced to 19 years in prison, he was released in 2023. Lula da Silva, the most powerful figure in the Lava Jato case, was elected president again, assuming a third presidential term in January 2023. Marcelo Odebrecht gave up his shareholding in the construction company in 2022, and the company was renamed Novonor. This is Latinometry. Subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss our interesting videos about Latin America. Please like and share this video, and thanks for watching.